Comic book collecting can be fun, exciting, and joyful, but there are often fears in our heads. Today, two experienced collectors share their greatest fears. Hi, I'm Keston. I've been collecting for about 12 years, and I'm joined by Overstreet advisor Ben Labanog, who's been in the game for 30. Losing value in the comic books I already own. And I know many of you out there are in the same situation, that over the last year or so, comic books have really been coming down, especially silver, bronze, copper, and more modern. But for me, this is the last fear on my list, because I deal in money to get comic books versus the other way around. I love these comic books so much, even if they were to continue going down in value somewhat, I'd still be happy to own my copy of Captain America Comics #1 or Suspense Comics #3.
The general collector not knowing the history or not caring about the history of comic books and publications and how they evolved over time, different companies, Timely, DC, Fawcett, etc. I'm kind of an old school collector, whether it's Overstreet, whether it's comic book marketplace, articles that were handwritten and, material that was lost in the past that maybe not be appreciated today. So that's always a fear of mine, to try to fight that and educating people or having these conversations about historical figures in the hobby.
Some of my comic books getting bitten by my new puppy. So just got a new puppy. I love the dog. And I try to be really careful with my comic books, but every now and then I leave a comic book on a table and don't think about it. And then every now and then my dog gets into a room that he's not supposed to get into. And I can just imagine what that mess might be. And I imagine some of the viewers out here who have young kids or they have pets of their own might be in that situation.
Grade is kind of a fear of mine. Back in the day, you just wanted a copy of the book and you weren't too concerned about the grade as long as it looked decent from the front. The cover could be detached, you didn't care. And I think we're a little obsessed with that number in that corner of that label because of the high dollars that are being spent. So we've kind of put ourselves in that position. One guy pays X amount, the next guy has to pay X plus 20. And now we're paranoid about the grade because, we want to make sure we get our money back and more. So it's a slippery slope, but it's kind of what the industry has to deal with now, especially these new collectors coming in and, having to pay what they have to pay.
Collectors, the majority of them seem like they're only caring about what's in the MCU. And so if it's not covered there, if that hero doesn't appear, then that book doesn't matter. To me, that's really sad because there's just so many great books from so many different eras, so many different publishers that people won't spend the time to get to know because they're not in the movies. On the flip side, though, that could be an opportunity as well, in that these are books that are being overlooked right now, and that perhaps once again, in the later years, they'll be picked up and people will like them.
I think there is an obsession with manipulation. And I don't say that in a bad way, like you're manipulating a book to gain from it in a way that is not ethical. I'm just saying that everybody wants to get the better grade. And I don't know, sometimes it can be looked at as, well, do we have to press and clean everything? Again, I'm old school. I like 1939 dirt on my books. And maybe I'm the only one that wouldn't clean, a Marvel one that would improve its appearance. Yeah, I probably wouldn't, just because I like the 1939 dirt on it. I want that dirt from the Larson barn on my book still. I don't want it cleaned off. So, but that's just me. I understand that if there's $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 on the line that could increase the grade, who's to say someone can't resist that temptation?
I almost forgot to mention one of my greatest fears, and that is that nobody will like this video. If you like what you've heard so far from Ben and me, please consider giving this video a like. Another one of my fears is that we keep going down further into political extremism with comics. And extremism might be the wrong term. Maybe it's just that we put the political ideas more in the forefront than in the background of comic books and comic book movies. I like comic books, as a kid, for mostly an escape, get into this world that is, amazing, with superheroes and supervillains doing things that we could never do in every day. Now, as a kid, I may have missed some of the political things that were kind of the undercurrents of some of these comic books, and that's okay. But today I just see all these videos of comic book collectors and people who comment on pop culture being upset by somebody who's really right wing or somebody who's really left wing. And I was like, can't we have some comic books and comic book movies that are really trying to appeal to everybody?
The slabbing is, I've always said, is a necessary evil. I think there is a fear of collectors not being able to grade. That's always been my concern, and I've seen that where newer collectors don't have the experience of pulling a book out of a mylar, and they're afraid to touch and handle the book, so therefore they can't grade it properly. They don't know how many wraps or pages a book has, depending on the time period. So that's always been a fear of mine, dealing with collectors, that, hey, I'd have to have it graded because I don't know what's inside of it. And therefore, we're just looking at covers, and we're not as interested in interior art.
My next fear is also CGC related. By the way, I'm a big fan of CGC. These professional graders evaluated this book as a 4.5 or a 5. Gave me confidence to say, hey, I can go out there and I can buy that Amazing Spider-Man #1 or whatever book it might be. That being said, there is so much trust right now in the hobby and so much dependence on CGC. What happens if it's 10 years from now and CGC collapses? Whether that's because of some, money issue, or it may be because, somebody in there got super greedy. Let's inflate the grades so that we get more money coming in from people. I'm fearful for that, but I'm hopeful that CGC can try to be as objective as they can with grading and kind of hold that line.
Let's talk a little bit about the fear of, I guess, social media, as far as the impact it is in today's society and the hobby. Seeing someone, like we used to do, and you're meeting them at at the library or a post office, you're doing a deal in the parking lot, which still happens. There is a potential disconnect, I think, with social media transactions happening on the fly with purchases on Instagram or any social media boards. But we can be instantly connected as far as information, but we can also be just as socially disconnected in as far as how we connect as human beings.
I am concerned about counterfeiting, and over time people have gotten better at counterfeiting comic books. And that's why we're lucky to have a group like CGC that does that examination, and they have some of the best people in the hobby, maybe the best people overall, to see if something's been counterfeited or not. But I just think, gosh, over time, and with AI and these 3D laser printers and all that, it was like I can imagine a world where they could reconstruct almost molecule by molecule a comic book. I don't think we're there yet, but that does leave some fear in me if I'm making out at like 2050. Will we be able to catch great counterfeits in 2050?
There's no more secrets in the hobby. I guess that's kind of an indirect fear of mine, is that back in the day, you could find that gem like nobody knows about because, nobody knows this artist, Suspense 3 right there. That came to light because of the photojournals, in 1990, 91, right? Before that, it was a nothing book. There's no rock unturned these days. Everything gets discovered somehow, and the spread of that knowledge is so instant because of social media and the internet.
I'm also concerned that Hollywood keeps trying to go for bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like, okay, this has to be a villain that represents the toughest guy in the entire universe, and it's going to take us superheroes banding all together through not only the current time, but through 1,000 other dimensions of time. It's like, okay, I can't even understand what's going on anymore because it's getting too complicated. I think there's been a few people who said, let's go back to those simpler stories.
Yeah, I've gotten somewhat bored the last 3 or 4 years, and I don't use that in a negative term, but I've been pretty narrow-minded myself, primarily Golden Age timely superhero. Don't really venture too much into pre-code horror, romance, GGA. As you can see, some of the stuff on my wall is somewhat mainstream. I like Alex Schomburg. I used to think original art was the last final frontier, and I think for most people it is. And you could see I do have some pieces here, but for me, it's been a late discovery in the pulps, and I've been into that the last several months. This whole past summer. Probably something I should have gotten into earlier, but when you talk about hope and boredom, I think in the collecting community, whatever you collect, I think we have to be prepared to diversify and welcome new interests, because there are genres and books and items that you may have never considered, or you may have kind of sneered at or laughed at, that you may one day consider.
I'm most fearful of myself getting closed-minded when it comes to comic books. For me personally, I've gotten really into Golden Age. I like a particular artist, Alex Schomburg, and for a while I was only looking at the airbrush covers from the late 40s. I mean, that's how narrowly I was collecting. And then everything else was like, I don't care about it. I'm not going to look at it. Let me say it's good to find a niche that you really like and can be knowledgeable about. But the downside is there's so many amazing things out in the hobby. And on the kind of hopeful end, it kind of reminds me I need to open my mind up a little bit. And even though I am a self-proclaimed golden age snob, there are some great books later on. There's some great modern artists that have got great covers. So trying to expand my mind a little bit to include some of these other books. For those of you who have stuck around for a while in this video, I've got a special treat for you. A couple months ago, Ben texted me, said, Keston, I've got this really sweet book that I just bought, and we're going to show it here on YouTube for the first time. So, Ben, what is this amazing purchase that you made?
Yeah, let me pull it out here. All these years, I never owned this book, and part of the reason was I've always been chasing early Marvel mysteries and caps, and that took up so much time that I just didn't care about this book as much. So, but we talked about boredom, and this was a book that I'm like, hey, you know what? I decided to pick up because or search for because I never owned it. So that's a Submariner Comics #1. The first time Submariner had his own title. This came out in spring of 41. Pretty late in the game when you think about it with Timely, because 39 and 40 are the prime years. Everything was going great by this time, so everyone was getting their own titles. Cap already came out in December of 40. Torch already came out in September of 40. So Submariner was the last of the trio to get his own title.
If you enjoyed seeing Ben's copy of Submariner Comics #1, that's just the tip of the iceberg of his ultra rare, ultra valuable collection, which you can see more of in this video. And as always, if you like the content, consider subscribing. Thanks so much for watching, and hope to see you around real soon.